The Cincinnati Bengals are not offering Trey Hendrickson what he wants. He made that very clear on Wednesday. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm Jake Liscow, he's James Rapien, and we are Locked On Bengals, this show covering the Cincinnati Bengals every day since 2016 between James Rapien and myself. And you're in the right place if you're looking for your everyday Bengals news. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Thank all of you for making Locked On Bengals your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today, we're going to just dive into the Trey Hendrickson situation again. We got new details from his interview on the Pat McAfee Show. Of course, we've got Katie Blackburn's quote to talk about that was reported on by those down in Florida, and that aspect of things from the Bengals perspective that we need to talk about as well. And this episode brought to you by Gametime, where you can create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase of tickets. And James, there is a lot to get to here with these Trey Hendrickson comments. And we both got repeating themes in terms of communication. We've got analogies from Trey Hendrickson on the Pat McAfee Show. We got some details, I think, from Trey Hendrickson that we haven't heard him previously allude to in terms of some of the things that he wants, and perhaps a suggestion in him saying what he wants in terms of things that he's been offered that maybe he doesn't want. Where do you think this starts?
Where does it start? I'll tell you where it's headed. Let's start with where it's headed. And it's a 3-letter word. And it's not win. It's war. It's going to be a war now. That's what it is. Trey Hendrickson going on a national show like the Pat McAfee Show, which, by the way, Trey, just come on Locked On Bengals anytime, my man. It's to go there in like 16 hours after that quote, maybe 18 hours after that quote came out from Katie, which I'm going to read in just a second. That rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and we'll share thoughts on that quote in a bit. But Trey's pissed. I'm going to use that word, and I don't use that word a lot on it. He's clearly angry. And angry, yeah, he's smiling on the McAfee Show, but mad because when quotes like this roll out, he should be happy at certain rates that maybe he doesn't think he should be happy at. Some of it is on him to be happy at some point, and if he's not, that's what holds it up sometimes. It takes him to say yes to something, We have all the respect in the world for him. He's been a great player. We're happy to have him, and so maybe we'll find a way to get something to work. We're just going to see where it goes. And so that's the quote. And on the surface, that doesn't seem too crazy, at least to me. But when you have the communication issues, when I think the Bengals and Trey are universes apart in how they're looking at his value and what he wants versus what they're offering, and I think that's fair to say. I don't know the exact numbers. I'll go out on a limb, Jake, and say they're not offering him $33 million per. I'll go out on a limb and say they're not offering him a bunch of guaranteed money. And so
that's not out on a limb. For those of you that's not clear to, that is not out on a limb at all.
No,
that's not a leap.
Oh, not a leap. That's zero vertical. It's NFL combine season. Like if you're doing the vertical leap, that's zero. That's zero on broad jump. That relative athletic score is none, zero, void. It's look, this is going to be a battle, war, whatever you want to say. I'll use those two words, and I'm going to continue to. And that's no disrespect to anyone that actually is doing real battles, real world wars. We're talking about football here. But in reality, we know how the Bengals are in these situations. And for Trey to go on there and do that 18 hours after seeing that quote or whatever it was. I mean, she talked yesterday at like 4 p.m. The article started to come out around 7 or 8 p.m. And by 1:15, 1:20 on Wednesday, the next day, Trey Hendrickson's on Pat McAfee Show saying he feels disrespected and we're going to dissect this thing. Like that's put your helmet on. This is going to be a battle.
Yeah. And the interesting thing to me about, well, there's so many interesting things.
So many.
I don't know why I started a sentence that way because there's really so much to get to here. But one of the things that stands out to me when you're talking about this battle, and it does seem like it's going to drag out. Hopefully it doesn't. This is something that we've talked about wanting to see this team avoid this year. Don't let this thing get into training camp again. Don't repeat the distractions from last year where your entire team is now watching one of the best players on the team in a contract dispute when they're trying to get ready for a football season, not participating in training camp. And Trey brings up the point. Trey was very sneaky about this. He's sneaking his negotiating points in there, right? Like Sam Hubbard's not there anymore. And now you want to have a defensive line room where you don't have Trey Hendrickson in training camp either. You have a bunch of young guys or guys on prove-it deals, 1-year deals for Cam Sample and Joseph Osai and rookie deals. And that's your edge rusher room in training camp without Trey Hendrickson.
And it's a hell of a point, isn't it? I mean,
he's bringing up some good points. And he made, and we'll talk about some of these others because he has the good real estate analogy. He's talking about the other contracts that are going on, the quote that he was asked about directly and his reaction to the quote, some words about respect and action versus words. You can, doesn't take a PhD and reading between the lines to see that he's not happy. But in terms of this thing dragging out, Trey's also talking about the offseason program right around the corner. And he wants to participate. At least that's what he's saying, right? And this is, I'm sure, a negotiating ploy as well to some degree to try to light a fire and say, hey, I want to be there for the offseason program. I want to be there for OTAs. I want to be there when the rookies are getting their first impression. And think about what Zach Taylor had to say on Monday about the camaraderie that he wants to build where there's no more locker room split in preseason because the locker room's done. So you don't have to put the rookies in one locker room and the veterans in the other, which was the case in training camp last year while they were finishing the locker room. And the
linemen in another. Like it was 3 different locker rooms.
Yeah. I mean, and so avoiding that and getting everybody into the same room and building and Trey Hendrickson's not there. One of the guys that's a leader on your defense. And yes, this isn't all the Bengals' fault for those of you out there that want to apologize for the Bengals in this. Trey Hendrickson's agent and his decision to agree to that extension is certainly a speed bump in their goal of achieving a long-term deal. But Trey's very clear on what he wants at this point. And that was one of the big takeaways from me is he's very, very clear in what he's been asking for. And he said for 3 years, I know that the 1-year extension was in the last 3 years, but what he's been asking for sounds like it's been pretty consistent and it's just adjusting with the market as it goes.
Yeah. And there are a couple things there. I think that there are going to be a lot of listeners and viewers that say, Trey, you're under contract. Trey, you're under contract. That's it. You signed the contract. You're under contract. You're going to play. And I think it was one of the most revealing things because it's been speculated on, but one of the most revealing things that happened during that McAfee interview, and he got to it right away, outside of the miscommunication and stuff like that, or the lack of communication and the respect part of it, which we'll still get to. But there was a real clear moment where I was like, oh, this impacts a lot. And we will get to that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. It certainly shouldn't be as stressful as negotiating long-term contract extensions. And that's where Gametime comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Whether you want to watch the Reds, whether you're thinking about going to Indianapolis for the NBA playoffs or going to Cleveland for the NBA playoffs or any of the awesome concerts that are going to happen this spring and summer, Gametime is going to have exactly what you're looking for. And they have the Gametime Picks feature, which filters out all of the nonsense, all of this back and forth that you have to do searching for tickets. Well, it filters all of that out and it shows you the best deals, the best value. And so you can get the most bang for your buck in the seats that you are looking for. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. And make sure you toggle that all-in pricing so you know exactly what you're going to pay for your seats. Again, that's LOCKEDON NFL, Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
You had a eureka moment?
Yeah, going back to, he said 3 years ago. And so 3 years would be 2022. I want to say he's thinking 2023. I assume it wouldn't be 22 because he was only a year into the deal. But in 2023, when they gave him that 1 year contract extension, he clearly wanted a longer term deal then. The market had changed. Last year, after getting that 1 year extension, tried to revisit it after doing that in 23, revisiting it in 24. Obviously, that didn't happen. But what he said was that they discussed in a meeting with my agent that 2025 would be the year. Go out there and play, and we'll get it done. And this isn't just going way back to last offseason where they said that they got him to play, and now they're like, oh, well, T and Jamar, we have to reshuffle the deck. No, they told him this at the combine too. That was a big thing to me. So like this idea that, oh, well, Trey's he's trying to get a new deal, but he's under contract. Yeah, but he's saying they told him that they were going to get something done, which is probably why he showed back up to OTAs last year after that trade request. And after that trade request, what was like 48 hours. It was such a quick one. It wasn't that quick, but it was really quick. And he rescinded it and he showed up and everything was fine. They probably said, hey, Trey, we're going to take care of you. And then he goes and leads the NFL in sacks and wants to get taken care of. And the market shoots up and the Bengals now are probably like, oh, I don't know what to do. And here we go.
And they take care of him at what rate and in what context? Because there are a couple specific things that come up in terms of what Trey's after, right?
Sure.
He wants the long-term idea of where his family is going to be. This is something that's consistently come up for him. Does that mean he needs a 3-year extension?
Yep.
It's kind of what it sounds like, because he's talking about the rest of his career in this interview. Yep. He's talking about 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
Where his family is going to be. Talking about his wife a lot in this conversation, right? Where he's going to be with his wife, with his family, and that being very important to him. And also coming up is this idea of guarantees. And this is something that we maybe didn't think would be as necessary with Trey, based on the fact that he had agreed to the Bengals structure twice, that his agent has that history of getting those deals done with the Bengals. It didn't involve those guarantees. But now Trey very explicitly talking about wanting guarantees in that contract. Also, very explicitly talking about not wanting to play for incentives outside of his control. So long-term contract, guarantees, no incentives that have to do with reaching the Super Bowl or the AFC Championship game. T. Higgins has those incentives in his contract. There's a lot of money in those incentives, and that's great. But Trey's not trying to play for incentives that he can't control. He wants to know what money he's making, have that security, and have those multiple years. And he wants to do it in Cincinnati, despite the issues we're going to talk about around respect that came up because of the Katie Blackburn quote.
Yeah, look, I would be shocked if the Bengals weren't offering incentives. And incentives are fine, but Trey's not dumb with this. Like, I'm sure he looked at that deal for Max Crosby and was like, like, because when you really look at it, the details with it, it's one of those things where it's like, I think he looked at the Danielle Hunter deal, given everything you just said, and was like, yeah, I'm better than him. I want more than a year. I want long-term. I want guarantees. They gave him to not only Jamar, but T. Like, the precedent is broken. And he probably doesn't even go to T. He probably just goes to Jamar. I said, you give him to Jamar, I led the NFL in sacks. I'm on that level too. And that's, honestly, you can't argue it, because I guarantee you other teams offered him that guaranteed money. That's why letting him seek a trade was dumb in the moment, I thought. And it makes it so much harder, because now that what he wants is pretty, I'm sure it's crystal clear. I'm sure his agent's been like, here are these offers we have. And so if you're the Bengals, it's like, all right, well, what do you do? And so I think there's a lot there. One, they don't blink in these situations, even though they did kind of with the the seek a trade thing. But I think that they were like, all right, well, yeah, if you give us a first round pick, we'll consider trading our 30-year-old defensive end.
Not 3 first-round picks, which Pat McAfee claimed. That was, I don't think, ever the
Did he
asking
say
price.
that?
He said that based on reports, he thinks the Bengals were asking for 3 first-round picks, which is crazy. There was never a
No.
report that said
I
for
kn-
3 first-round picks. So if you heard that,
Yeah.
I do not believe that for a second. I think Pat McAfee mistaken there.
Yeah, one first. That's fair. Like
And I don't
think
think they got that offer, because if they did, I think they might have taken it.
I think so too. They've dealt with like there's a reverse side here. Like Trey's brought this up for 3 years about how he wants these things. Well, the Bengals have dealt with it for 3 years about how he wants these things. And it's getting louder now. And by the way, I'm not saying Trey's wrong. I get it. If I led the NFL in sacks, I'm like, you better pay me right now. So I get that. I also understand last year with 2 years left, not rushing to it. But here's the thing for me. If you were willing to pay Trey, like if you deep down they were willing to pay Trey this year, like last year they thought that, well, why didn't you just juice that up by 2 years last year? It would have been easier to do it last year. The market hadn't moved. You didn't even get Jamar done anyway. And it just like looking back, it's like, well, if you were willing to then, and you weren't going to say, we're going to kick the can down the road for 2 years. Like it's way more complicated now because the market changed, which it's up to them to see that. And it's pretty easy to see that it would be changing when you look at who's up, and it might continue to change with some of these other guys that are potentially getting paid. That's where I look at the Bengals, and it's like, well, if you were open to paying a 30-year-old Trey Hendrickson, then doing it last year would have made a ton of sense. And then you wouldn't be in this situation. And who knows what you'd be focused on, but it certainly wouldn't be Trey Hendrickson going on the Pat McAfee show.
Yeah. I think hindsight always 2020, right?
Sure.
It's
No
always
doubt.
easy to look back and say they should have done T 2 years ago. They should have done Jamar last year. They should have done Trey last year or 2 years ago or whenever. And on Trey's side of things, it's easy to say you should have never taken that 1-year extension.
But if you were willing to, like, I totally get why those things happened or didn't happen. So I just mean if the Bengals like had a meeting and they were like, yeah, we're willing to pay him next offseason.
Yeah.
And that was like a real thing. Like if they're truly willing to, it's different to say it versus truly believe it. But if they truly believe that, well, then why wait? Because if you do it last year, then you don't have to do as many years. And you're not talking about a 34-year-old Trey Hendrickson or you know what I'm saying? Like there's incentive there to get it done last year if you're willing.
And at the same time, for Trey, he's looking for the last big payday, essentially.
No doubt.
And so accepting that 1-year extension in the first place, massive mistake, right? Prevents you from getting back to the market as a free agent. And so it's kind of this conundrum that both sides have put themselves in a position where the Bengals said, okay, we'll take care of you next year. Trey goes and balls out and is second in Defensive Player of the Year voting, and many think he should have been the Defensive Player of the Year, leads the league in sacks. Then you get contracts for Danielle Hunter, for Max Crosby, for Myles Garrett. You're expecting Micah Parsons, maybe TJ Watt to get new deals as well. And he used this real estate analogy a couple times. Talks about being on Zillow and looking at prices over the years. He refers to Josh Hines Allen and Brian Burns and Rashawn Gary. Rashawn Gary got $24 million in 2023. Brian Burns and Allen got $28 million in 2024. And now this year, you get the huge jump to $35 million for players that are 30 or around 30. And he brings that up in this interview as well. Like, hey, look, I'm not the only one that's 30 that's asking for money here. Another point that he brings up and is pointing to these other contracts that are comparables. And so it makes him look very reasonable, I'll say. On the Bengals side of things, you talked about that trade request not making sense at the time. It made sense if they were willing to move him quickly and then reallocate those monies. That's like the only way. I don't think
we said that at the time. And we said that at the time. Like, if you do it right now.
And it's still not optimal, right? But like, that's the only way it could make sense. And at this point, if you trade him, there's nobody. Like, what are you doing
Oh,
for that part of your defense? Like,
you
where
can't
is the
trade.
havoc on your defense?
You
So,
can't.
if you can't trade him, where does that leave you?
The,
Right?
the only way you could trade him is if someone gave you a first and then some, and then it still makes you worse this year, but you just want to avoid the headache. Like that would be someone bumps up their offer. I don't even think they got offered a high second, by the way. I don't think they were offered like pick 33.
And then
Just to
where
give
does
you
that leave you? Right?
Yeah.
That's my question. And that's where we will go coming up next, in addition to getting to the Katie Blackburn respect line and a little bit more on that quote and something that needs to change from the Bengals front office, among other things. We'll get to those points coming up next.
The respect line. Let's get to that because Trey said, I found the quote here. You could say respect. Respect is something I have for Zach Taylor, and I take that approach every day, being on time, communicating with him. And yes, sir, I will do all the right things. There's a mutual respect. Just to say the word respect and actions are speaking a lot louder in a different direction. It's disappointing. And I do think that Jake, is just tying in the Katie quote. Why I think you and I are on the same page with the Katie quote. It's not that ridiculous on the surface. Like that's what negotiating is. Like it's like, oh well, yeah, he's not happy with it, and we would love for him to be happy with it, and maybe it'll work out. And like that's just kind of the emotionless approach that you kind of have to have in negotiating to a degree. Like I get it, but if there's no communication, that's the issue, and it goes back to the root of it. Like people are going to call it the Bengal way, like it, because of the lack of communication. Like if you have open, if it's like, Trey, I promise we're going to get you done. What we're really focused on right now is crafting the best roster possible. And we have you in mind. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we get you done. So we have you here for the offseason program. Like if that's communicated and very clear, I don't think that quote pisses Trey off and makes him mad. But because that quote is out there and there's no communication or very poor communication, Trey's words, now we're here where he's like, all right, well, if we're going to go to war, let's go. And I think that's batten down the hatch. Like, I think that's where everything is headed.
There's so much to that respect point from Trey Hendrickson too.
No doubt. Yeah.
How frustrating must it be for Zach Taylor is one thing that comes to mind. Like he's got this great relationship with this player who wants to play on his football team.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this contract dispute. And Trey Hendrickson is sitting here on the Pat McAfee Show invoking how he respects his head coach and his head coach respects him. But he doesn't feel like Katie Blackburn talking about, we have all the respect in the world for him. He's been a great player. We're happy to have him. He doesn't feel that respect when Katie's invoking that word in this quote.
Zach has to be the middleman,
Sucks. Yeah. I mean,
because you got to keep the player motivated, but it's not like he can be the one to get the deal done.
And that's Mickey Mouse stuff, man. I'm sorry, but that is not professional football team, professional football organization kind of stuff to me. And so that is very frustrating to see and picking that apart a little bit. But I think that another piece of this is what needs to happen for the Blackburn family to understand how these things are going to read and print.
Mm.
The quote starts, I think he should be happy at certain rates that maybe he doesn't think he'd be happy at. That sounds pretty bad, right? That sounds like Katie Blackburn is telling Trey Hendrickson how to be happy, right? If you read it in a certain way. But it could also be read as,
yes,
I think he should be happy at a number that he doesn't think he'll be happy at. Negotiating, right? Like, of course, I think he should be happy at, say, $29 million. And of course, he thinks he should be at $33 million. That's probably all Katie means. And because she's saying, it's on him to be happy at some point, and that's in the quote. And she's kind of putting the onus on the player to accept an offer it looks the way it looks. The optics are the optics. Even if the quote didn't have that intent, you know how Trey's seeing the quote? The same way everyone else is seeing the quote. Like his
Sure.
dad is texting it to him, I think, or maybe
Yep.
his agent. I think
Nope.
he was saying his dad sees most of the stuff, and
His
that's where he
dad.
gets it. So
Uh,
he's seeing these quotes via his dad on social media. He's
Yep.
like, man, she really said that. And he's seeing it the same way that all the fans saw it. And at some point, I think you got to be aware and more careful about the way you're saying things that are going to be portrayed in writing, because she also said, I'd be lying if I said I knew it was going to happen. And there's a lot of uncertainty around it. And she's being asked repeatedly. And then this comes up because she's answering a question about, I think it was reported that the question was, can you get to a point where both sides are happy?
Yeah.
And then she's talking about happiness as a result of that question.
Sure. And so there's levels to this, right? But the root of it is the communication. Like it solves it all. Like you may suck at interviews and say something that is taken out of context for a bunch of people. But if the communication with the player is there, then none of it matters. Then it blows away. There's no McAfee interview. There's no issues. There's going to be some frustration during negotiations. And that's probably what the Bengals will say today, right? I don't think that, by the way, open season, if anyone from the Bengals front office wants to come on and respond to Trey, absolutely ready to go. Jake and I would love to have you. But let's be honest here. We know how it's going to be. They're not going to respond. They're not going to freak out. They're going to be very even keeled about it. Fine. But just communicate with the camp. Like, let's go down the house analogy road. And if you're in negotiations on a house, you don't necessarily have to be completely, all right, well, we got to think of how this is portrayed by the seller or the buyer or whoever that you're going back and forth with. Like,
well, but you don't want to make an insulting offer. You're thinking about that when you're negotiating any kind of purchase.
Well, sure, but I'm not even talking about the offer. I just mean like communication of, hey, yeah, we're definitely interested. We definitely want to make an offer. Offers coming, just so you know. Like,
Yeah.
Like just keep the line. They have to have a plan. So just tell Trey. Tell Trey. Like it doesn't. You're not playing poker here to the degree that I think they're treating it as. Like if you want Trey, he wants to be in Cincinnati. Well, it doesn't need to be, oh, well, I can't show my hand because that may cost us. No. Just say, hey, man, we want to pay you. And make sure that that's always clear that that's a priority. Look, it's because otherwise you're asking Zach to do that. And players know that Zach isn't the one that's getting the deal done. And so that only holds so much weight.
And they need to do it. That's the other part of it, is if you're going to communicate and have players believe you and not scoff at you when you talk about respect and quotes at the owners' meetings. Trey's talking about actions speaking louder than words. And so while communication is important, there are a lot of fans in my replies already on social media like, what does Trey need to be explained that he's going to come after the wide receivers? He should know that. Sure, but a little bit of communication is easy. It's free and can set expectations. We talk a lot about expectation setting. It's been a while. But in my life, personally, speaking about personal anecdotes, James, expectation setting goes such a long way. When you're surprised, when you're blindsided by something versus when you expect something to happen, even if that thing isn't ideal, when you expect that it's happening and it's been communicated to you, that lands so much differently. And everyone can probably relate to that to some degree in their life, right? No different for Trey Hendrickson in this situation.
And so if you don't plan to get the deal done until June, explain to Trey why and that you plan to. By the way, that's unreasonable. Like there's no reason to wait that long. But just saying, like if that's whatever the plan is, just communicate it a little bit more. And maybe that this doesn't feel as now. What the Bengals will say is, yeah, James, you know what's going to help is if we pay him what he wants. And that's why it's just a player who's unhappy. Like I get it. Like you could take all the emotion out of it and look at it that way. And it's very black and white. Fine.
And there's some truth to it too.
No doubt. but there's also some gray.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to the world. There's gray.
Yeah, crazy.
There's gray in this. It's why it comes back to why is it always so hard? Like, why is it always this grinded out thing? Like, it doesn't have to be, and it doesn't. Just got to look around the league. It does not have to be. These deals come out of nowhere where you're not expecting it. There isn't a guy going on Pat McAfee saying this, and this. And so we'll see. We'll see when it comes to a head. But this is, I think it's a battle now. And this is going to be a stare down. And if they really told Trey, hey, we're going to take care of you, we'll now take care of him.
Yeah.
Like that's where I will come back to. And the market's changed. It's, if you tell, we're going to just use the house analogy. If you tell your wife, yeah, we're going to move next year, I promise. Well, she's going to remember that. And like, that's it, like that, but that for real, like, so the market may change. Well, maybe you should have done it when she wanted to move in the first place. And instead she's like, hey, not only are we moving, but I was just number one at my respective job at getting sacks. And so now, boom, you're going to pay me more because I got a raise. So that house price is going up. I mixed in 8 different analogies there. The point is,
might have lost.
Trey wants to get. It doesn't matter. Trey wants to get paid. Pay Trey. I mean, it's the same thing we talked about 3 months ago.
And beyond that, I don't know what else you do at this point. You try to hold him hostage to play on the 1-year deal. What happens then? How ugly does that get? Or you pay him, or there's some world, I guess, where like there's a trade that maybe happens at this point. But then what are you doing on your defense? I just don't see the other path and the other allocation of resources that makes sense at this point. So given that he has very clear requests, you have a very clear need at the position, and the alternatives are shooting yourself in the foot. I don't really know what else you do. I don't see what other direction this goes. It makes it hard. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Locked On Bengals podcast while we marinate on the Trey Hendrickson interview on the Pat McAfee Show. There's even more from the Katie Blackburn interview that we can talk about as well that we didn't get to today because we were so focused on the parts having to do with Trey Hendrickson. And one thing that I found so interesting about it, Paul Dehner Jr. did his podcast talking about the interview with Katie Blackburn, and Trey Hendrickson didn't even come up. And I think that might speak to the difference of how it felt to be there and how it felt to see that in writing. It's just something that occurred to me as I was watching that show. Anyway, we'll
daily
certainly
communication.
Oh, hey, we do that on Locked On Bengals.
That's right.
Crazy. And we'll do that here tomorrow for you as well. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hooday, and have a good one.
You think the Bengals should hire us to communicate with Trey every day?